Hello YouTube, Sidekick here with the first in what I hope is going to be a series of videos about the basics of dropping iron bombs in DCS. Now, I know this is a topic that I have covered a lot in the past, but I'm hoping that I'm actually going to kind of go back and review a lot of the stuff that we've talked about in a variety of different videos, put it all in one place and try to make this into kind of a course in dropping unguided ordnance. If I can manage to get it done, I'm hoping to also make a series of missions in DCS that will basically actually be a campaign that you can play through and learn and practice dropping bombs. I did a series of videos on the basic of dropping iron bombs a long time ago. I called it the Iron Bomber's Guide to the DCS Universe, but I've learned a lot the last few years, both about dropping bombs in DCS and about making videos about dropping bombs in DCS, so I thought it would kind of be good to go back and revisit the topic with that experience under my belt. Now, these videos are going to start out pretty basic. I'm hoping that they'll get a bit more into a bit more sophisticated, complicated topics as they progress. I'm definitely going to cover multiple different DCS aircraft, from modern aircraft with HUD symbology that make the process of dropping unguided bombs pretty easy, all the way back to the early jets and warbirds, where it's just you and a simple sight, and that's all you have available to get the bombs on target. Now, I'm going to start with the basics, but I hope to work up to topics like how to drop accurately from higher altitude, which is definitely an issue for a lot of us in DCS, how to do pop-up attacks, how and when to use countermeasures, how to defend against various kinds of threats, and I think we probably need to spend some time talking about how to even plan the missions. Now, I hope we might be able to get into some multiplayer tactics, techniques, and procedures as well, but I gotta admit, I still have a lot to learn about those topics, so I can't promise I'll be able to say anything useful about them just yet. So I think the series is going to go on for a while, at least I hope it is, but like everything else in YouTube, how many of these videos I make is going to be determined by how many people watch them. So if you want to see more of these videos, the best way to do that is to subscribe to the channel if you haven't, to like the videos, of course, and also to leave a comment or two. That helps as well. But anyways, with that being said, let's get started. So here's an animation of an aircraft dropping an iron bomb. And by iron bomb, we basically mean a bomb that has no guidance. Once it leaves the aircraft, where it lands is going to be entirely determined by where it was and where it was going when it left the aircraft. After it is released, it's all up to gravity. Now, that isn't to say that it isn't possible to predict exactly where it's going to land at the moment of release. It pretty much is. You'll know where it's going to land as soon as you release it. You just won't be able to do anything about it. So the entire trick in dropping iron bombs accurately is not to predict where they're going to land when you release them. That you can do, and has been done for every kind of ordnance you're ever going to drop and every aircraft you're going to drop them from. And those values have probably been tabulated somewhere in some form of bombing table. They usually consist of a list of release altitudes, dive angles, speeds, and maybe sight depressions. That's not the problem. The problem is how to put your aircraft in that location at that speed when you drop the bomb. So each aircraft is different also in terms of the ordnance, how the ordnance delivery system is set up, what tools are available, both to guide you to the right release point and to tell you when you're there. In some aircraft, it's actually pretty easy because you get a lot of help, but in some aircraft, you get no help at all. Similarly, the options for delivering the ordnance can range from, pretty complex and flexible with lots of different kinds of ordnance combinations to ones that are, very simple and very limited. So dropping iron bombs can seem very different across the various aircraft in DCS. If you sit in a P-47, it's not at all the same experience as if you sit in an A-10. But the fact is that there are some basic techniques that work regardless of which aircraft you're flying. And if you can master those basic techniques, you'll not only be more consistently accurate in the aircraft you fly, but you should also be able to develop proficiency in new aircraft whenever you decide to try them out. So the first thing to realize about dropping iron bombs, as opposed to precision-guided munitions, is that your accuracy is determined by your ability to fly the aircraft, rather than by knowledge of how to use its systems like the targeting pod and the radar. Of course, you'll need to know how to select the right ordnance and configure it for delivery, so you do need to understand how the aircraft does those things. But in the end, whether or not you hit the target consistently, is going to be determined by some basic aviation skills. For that reason, I will warn you that there really is no replacement for practice, and I'm going to say that a lot during this series, I'm sure. Dropping iron bombs really is a perishable skill, which means that you will get better with practice, but you will also start getting worse as soon as you stop. And that's why a lot of these videos are going to take place, frankly, on the range. Now, if you were doing this training as part of a real flight training, you would, no doubt, get this introduction as part of jet lead-in or basic jet training. And you would be flying something like the C-101 or the equivalent of the F-5, the T-38. Essentially, you'd be in an aircraft that's relatively simple and relatively easy to fly, as compared to a frontline fighter. This is, of course, natural, because in that context, if you were actually learning to do this for a living, you would absolutely have to focus on flying well and improving your flying skills before anybody would be asking you to drop bombs from an aircraft. But it would mean that the bombing system and the bombing aids in those training aircraft would be pretty rudimentary. And that would actually make learning how to bomb harder in some ways. Now, of course, once you were good at it with that basic system, you'd find it much easier to do in the advanced jets, which is, of course, why air forces do it that way. But that's not actually what I'm going to do in this series, I think, because I thought about it a lot, and I really do want to focus on the technique for dropping the bombs, and I'm actually going to start at the other end. I'm going to start with the aircraft that have sophisticated bombing aids, because I want those aids to help illustrate the process and also to make it easier for you guys to be successful when you're learning, which will hopefully encourage you to keep trying and getting better. And then after we learn how to drop bombs when it's easy, when we have all of the HUD symbology to help us, then we'll start dialing up the degree of difficulty by taking away those automated bombing aids and by adding constraints and including simulated defenses. So we're going to start with the basics using one of the DCS jets that comes with fully instrumented HUD designed for dropping iron bombs. Specifically, the training missions will give you the choice usually of probably a choice between the A-10A, the Harrier, or the F-18. There are others I could use, but I think that's a good cross-section. Because the Hornet is a very popular module, so it might well be an entry point for a lot of sim pilots. Both the Harrier and the A-model A-10 are sophisticated aircraft, but they also started out life as iron bombers, so they're really well adapted to this. They weren't originally designed to deliver precision munitions. So all of the training missions will have each of these three aircraft available. And for demonstrations in the video, I'll always fly one of those jets. So before we go any further, let's take a look at actually the HUD symbology on these kinds of jets and the pieces of that are going to be important for helping us drop iron bombs. Now, every aircraft HUD is going to be a little different, but for bombing purposes, they're always going to have three elements that we're going to want to pay attention to when we are dropping bombs. So the first of these is the total velocity vector, or flight path vector. Usually this is a little circle with wings on it. This shows you where the aircraft is going. Dropping down the screen from the flight path vector is a line. It goes by different names, but I'm going to call it the bomb fall line. At the bottom of the bomb fall line is the pipper, which marks the spot where the bombs are actually going to hit the ground. Now, these symbols might be a little different depending on the aircraft HUD. Sometimes you get a cross, sometimes you get just a line, sometimes you get a line in a circle like we have here on the A-10, but they're always all going to be there on the HUD in some form. So basically, if we go back to our animation of the aircraft dropping the bomb, this is the flight path vector here, this is the location of the pipper here, and on the screen the bomb fall line is the line that joins the two. Now, it's important to understand what happens as you dive towards the target. When you first roll in, the predicted impact point is well below the aircraft. It could even be off-screen on the HUD. As you dive, the predicted impact point moves up the screen because you're getting closer to the ground. Note that this is not because you are pulling up. This is because the aircraft is closer to the ground, so the bomb is not falling as far behind the aircraft. If all you do is fly straight at a point on the ground, the Pipper will move up the bomb fall line. Ultimately, if you didn't pull up, the Pipper and the flight path vector would come together as you crashed into the ground. Now, obviously, this behavior is going to be the same regardless of whether you have a HUD symbology to show you that it's happening or not. And it's this process that we want to make use of when we drop bombs. Our objective is always going to be to point the aircraft at some point beyond the target and then fly straight towards that point and wait for the bomb impact point to come up to the target. The trick, of course, is going to be how to set up our dive so that we arrive at that point without having to make a lot of adjustments that will throw off our aim. And then, of course, we need to know how to know when we're there so we can actually drop the bombs at the right time. Doing all of that consistently is basically the point of what we're going to try to learn and practice in this series. So we'll start the details of how to actually make that happen in the next video, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, if you'd like to see more of these videos, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. And for now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.